This podcast is brought to you by our Tiki's Geckos annual Black Friday sale where we're doing 50% off our Crested Geckos, Gargoyle Geckos, Blue Tongue Skinks, and 20% off everything else on the website. This is our biggest sale of the year. If you're looking for that investment quality animal, make sure you check out our website, sign up to our VIP email and text message notifications to get early access coupon codes. All right, everybody, what is up? I am here with a legend in the reptile game. I am here with a pioneer of our new Caledonian geckos, of course. If you have been keeping crested geckos or gargoyle geckos, giant geckos for some time, you know the name Repashy. You might not know him personally, but you definitely know the name Repashy because he is the creator of the revolutionary Repashy diet that allowed us to actually keep these animals in captivity. And it's what took these animals to the next level, in my opinion. It's what made them so popular. So, Allen, I want to thank you for joining me here and having this conversation. And I'm really excited to talk to you here, make this video, because I know I have a lot of questions and a lot of people that watch have these same questions that I know you'll be able to answer.
Well, thanks, David. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you. I'm an open book, so whatever you want to talk about, we'll just see where it goes.
Yeah, for sure. So, I can remember the first time I started getting into crested geckos. I have that memory like vivid implanted in my brain. I basically went to a reptile show and somebody there had a red, like a red patternless female, and they let me hold it. And just after that, it spiraled out of control. I went home, started researching it, and at that time,
What
I
what
think you're what was that?
what were you keeping at the time?
At the time, I just had a bearded dragon, and I think I've had sugar gliders, but I was just like, I
You
want
were
to
a
say
sponge
like
too.
12 years old or 11 years old.
That's cool.
So yeah, my uncle took me to that reptile show. I came across a crested gecko, and then I went back, and it just it went crazy from there. But do you remember your first time when you came across a crested gecko?
Um, well, obviously the first time I saw it was in photos, and God, the first time I actually saw one,
In person?
I guess it would have had to have been Philippe's uh, collection, and I can't remember exactly. I think it was Philippe. If not, then it was on a trip to Europe, and it would have been Willie and his gang. But I think it was Philippe that I first saw one, and as soon as I saw them, I was just like, you know. And then you look back and you're like, well, were they really that cool, or was I just so excited because no, they didn't exist, and there was a whole like mystique around them being thought to have been extinct and being
Instinct.
rediscovered, and so you have this like preconception that it's already, no matter what it is, it's going to be the coolest thing you've ever seen, right? Just because of the
Yeah.
story behind it. But when you boil it down, they really, really are like nothing else. I mean, these were animals that didn't have tails, and we didn't know what a tail looked like, or even if the tail was going to be prehensile or not. So,
Yeah, I
you know,
heard you. I heard you in one of those podcasts with at Project Herpeticulture that they would lose their tail super easily. That you had the cat go in the room, and then all the geckos
oh
drop their
yeah,
tail, and then you were
yeah, yeah.
actually breeding. You were actually breeding for them to keep their tail longer, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
In that podcast, it's a great podcast if anybody wants to check it out on Project
yeah,
Herbiculture. But I'm sure that we'll touch on a few of those same things, but we'll have a lot of different stuff going on here today. But yeah, there was a book that I was exposed to before that about how to turn a fox into a dog, about how quickly that um, we think that a wolf became a dog over tens of thousands or thousands of years, but they did
yeah,
this experiment in Russia, and they did it in 10 to 20 generations, not 10 to 20 thousand years, and they quickly in just a few generations were able to breed these animals. They just selected every season they would select the low stress animals that were more friendly to people and just kept breeding those. And then all these other characteristics showed up that were kind of attached to those genes. But I'm like, well, if I look at this tail dropping thing as a stress reaction to humans, then I'm really kind of trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to
Yeah.
breed animals that show less signs of stress around me. And the only thing that I could really identify would be, you know, whether or not they're going to throw their tail, because that's the only really real sign of stress that we can visualize with them. So I'm like, well, I'll give it a shot. And I literally, like, in the beginning, it was like, nothing lasted more than 3 or 4 months without dropping its
It's
tail. But
crazy.
I had geckos that would drop their tail in 2 weeks, and some that would take 2 or 3 months. And I just said, okay, whoever lasts the longest is going to go. They're going to
In the
go into this,
breeding group.
and because I was really like the one thing that really bummed me out. Once you raised an animal and saw that it had a prehensile tail, it like made them that much cooler. And then you're at the same time you're like, why does something that has a prehensile tail that's such a an important part of their behavior, being able to being arboreal and having a prehensile tail is awesome. Why are they so quick to give that up? And
Right.
and so it was just like, well, if it's equally cool in captivity to have them hang from your tail and just to see the full animal with its tail. So I'm like, man, I really hope that we can get these animals to not drop their tails. And so it was, at the time, it was the most important thing to me. It was more important than breeding for color and pattern, really.
Right, right. And when you so you got your first, group of crested geckos, did you like right off the bat start breeding gargoyle geckos and lichianes and chahua and all those, or did you just stick to crested geckos for some time and then start to develop your other collection?
No, I pretty much went Rhacodactylus nuts all at once.
Yeah.
At the time, I had a guest bedroom in my house that had the front wall and the back wall. I had set up in they were actually, excuse me, melamine cages with glass front doors, and I had them all set up with Europlatus, um, uh,
Mm,
Hinkeli fimbriatus, Sakuri, and so they were already set up in arboreal cages. And then as soon as the Rhacodactylus showed up, the unfortunately the Europlatus got sent out the
got the
back
boot.
door. I mean, there's the Europlatus were cool too. Um,
Yeah.
but everybody had Europlatus and nobody had Rhacodactylus. And for me, it was like the joy of keeping something that's unknown is just literally the experience of learning what they want, what they need. It's like putting a puzzle together, and if you're the first person that's been given the puzzle, um, it makes it that much more challenging for you. So it's like, you know a race is or a journey is not necessarily about the destination. It's about getting there. And
Right.
for me, it's like once I learn how to breed something, and it's all kind of a cookie cutter process, the challenge and the fun isn't there anymore. But it's figuring out that process, figuring out what temperatures they want, what humidity they want, what how they interact with each other, if they're okay in groups, if they need to be in pairs, they need to be kept singly and introduced for breeding, and what their cycles are, when they lay eggs, how often they lay eggs. And
What
so
on
all that
that on
is
that
completely unknown.
on that note, when did you figure out that they were also fruit eaters? Was it like right away, or did you guys like offer some? I know like you guys started with the baby foods and then eventually you developed the diet, but
Yeah.
when like, because assuming that most Europlatus, for example, they eat insects, they're
Mhm.
strictly insect eaters. When did you say, oh, maybe these guys will actually take to fruit? And then how long did it take before you were confident in saying, okay, we could feed my colony fruits and these baby
Um,
foods and stuff?
it started with me, just like I said, like trying to figure out what they want, and I didn't know, and I just said,
Yeah.
let's see what they eat. And no one had told me that that they eat fruit or they eat sugar. So I actually started, excuse me, I actually started with honey. I put
Mm.
some honey in the cages, and they just sucked it up like
Yeah.
just went straight forward, and within a few weeks they would, as soon as I'd show up with my little honey bear with the squeezy top, and I had some
Yeah,
little belly.
yeah.
As soon as I'd open up the thing and squeeze the honey, and they'd be out for the honey. So then from honey, it went to trying different fruits, um, and and then just learning process. Like they didn't like the acidic fruits so much. They liked the soft fruits. Banana was the number one hit, and one of the first things I tried. Um, and and then it was just like, well, if they eat fruit and honey and insects, then if I can mix this all together into something that I can feed them, um, that's a win-win. And I didn't really, it took a while, but not that long, where the little light bulb went off in my head. It's like, oh man, like maybe you could make a diet that would eliminate the need for insects. Um,
Right.
and and it wasn't because I wanted to get them away from insects, but because they had so much potential in my eyes to be, um, another leopard gecko. More than just a reptile specialist's, um,
Right.
animal,
Mainstream. Something
more
mainstream.
mainstream. I always use the word ambassador. Like we have a small number of reptiles and amphibians that I would call ambassador species, and those are the species that are easy to keep. They're available, and people generally have good experiences with them, and those are the ones that bring people into the hobby. You don't bring
Right.
somebody you don't bring somebody into the hobby, um, with a Europlatus or a
Argarnia.
yeah, a Gurnia or a Bronia, or just
Yeah.
something,
Right, right,
something that's difficult. You have to have, um, in order to grow a hobbyist, you have to groom them with easy to care for species. Because if the first experience is a bad experience, chances are they're going to leave the hobby or switch to fish or get a bird or a hamster. But if that
right.
first experience is a good experience, then you've got the potential of turning someone into a specialist and a hobbyist. And so the ambassador species are the kind of the animals that that help people cross that bridge. They get people interested in them, and then they learn that they have confidence that they can take care of this animal, this species, and they're like, oh well, now maybe I can try something a little more challenging, and branch out from there. So without those species, we wouldn't have so many people that turn into the hobby. Like,
Right.
bearded dragons, leopard geckos, now crested geckos, but at the time it was really bearded dragons,
Green
leopard
iguana
geckos.
or something.
Yeah, green iguanas were, yeah, they were kind of more of a nightmare than not, because everybody
Yeah,
got a, baby green iguana and put it in a 20-gallon tank, and next thing you know, it can't even turn around in the thing, and that's not great either, because then they have, then they have to figure out what to do with it, and the rescues are overloaded with them,
yeah.
so they're they're not really, I
Yeah.
wouldn't consider them great ambassador species either. And then with
Right, right, right.
amphibians, you have like, a couple of newts, fire-bellied toads,
Dumpy
um,
tree frogs.
yeah, dumpy tree
Yeah.
frogs, um, red-eyed tree frogs, are one of those species that, like, in a way they're an ambassador, but in a way they're not, because they're they're not an ambassador for the hobby, but they're an ambassador for conservation in the rainforest. So when somebody gets a reptile for the first time, they not only often learn about, um, how to take care of it in captivity, but they're like, "Oh, where's this from? New Caledonia. Never heard of that. Where's New Caledonia?" And so having a gecko turns into a geography lesson, which
Yeah.
then you start studying the weather. You start studying all these other sciences that you're introduced to, that because you have a gecko. And so the red-eyed
Yeah.
tree frog is like, an ambassador for the rainforest. It's like, oh wow, that's a really cool frog. Where does it come from? Oh,
Right.
it comes from the rainforest in Costa Rica or wherever, and these areas are being deforested, and so you all of a sudden you have a connection between a red-eyed tree frog and rainforest conservation, and
Right.
and and so they're an ambassador in that way as well. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I 100% agree. When I said green iguana, I meant like for whatever reason, like back then, that was like one of the reptiles that were like
Oh yeah,
most
it
commonly
was
available. But
it
you're
was
right.
in every
It's not a
flavor.
good ambassador. It's
Yeah,
not a
yeah,
good ambassador reptile.
yeah.
Um,
And then back then for snake people, sorry if I always leave out the poor snake people. But
the
back
boas,
back then we had colubrids,
horses,
corn
yeah.
snakes and king snakes. Hold on, let me turn my phone off here. It's making noise. Why don't you shut up?
So so when you so with this massive collection of New Caledonian geckos that you had, what were your groups like? Talk me through the first couple years of experimenting with groups, like you were saying earlier,
Mm,
how you were trying to figure out when they would be if you would keep a male and a female together, or a male to three females, or
right.
how long you would keep them together. Talk me through those first couple years of you figuring
Well,
that out.
in the first couple of years, it was really about not really having a choice, because it wasn't like there was that many geckos out there where I could just,
Right.
say if I had five females, I had five males. I couldn't just,
Yeah.
uh, and I wasn't ready at the time to just start selling off males for a long time. So I kept things in pairs and trios until my room was full. Then you have to make a decision. It's like, okay, do I need a bigger room, or do I start playing around seeing how they do? And I ended up going from 1.1 a pair to 1.5, and I just worked my way up, and I did like a stack of racks of each ratio, um, and then I found that sometimes 1.5 would work really well, sometimes it wouldn't. And that basically came down to whether or not I had a good male or not. Some males
Mm.
could service five women, and some males can service one woman. Depends if you're Catholic or Mormon, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but no,
So,
but seriously, seriously.
did you come up with a magic number for your Crested Gecko groups? Like that
Uh,
you said,
for,
okay, this
for
is the
me,
best.
for me, um, if I had all the space in the world,
Yeah,
I think 1.2, 1.3.
right.
Um,
Okay.
in a breeding facility where you're trying to optimize every square foot, 1.5 worked pretty well if I had a good male. But
Okay.
I would have to monitor the cage a lot more, and make sure that the females were all producing good eggs. And then if they weren't, then I'd have to rotate. I'd had to rotate and take more care with the males in a cage with that many females. Where if I had 1.2, 1.3, I found that most of the time good eggs came out of those cages all the time.
And would you keep the male in there with the females all year, or would you separate the male?
I kept them all together all the time.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
didn't, and I know this will be controversial too, but I raise animals together, and when they're ready to breed, they breed.
Yeah.
I never raised males and females separately. But a couple of caveats to that, I guess. It's like, and this will steer us probably towards food. Um, but you can have an animal that's 8 months old, that's 25 grams, and you can have another one that's 40 grams, depending on what you feed it, and
Right.
how much how sweet the food is. And the problem is an animal that grows fast and is big isn't necessarily any more ready to breed than an animal that's half its size that's not ready to breed. It's kind of like
Right.
they're still the same inside. One's just bigger and fatter, but if it's that big it very well likely hasn't got fully calcified bones. It doesn't have
Bones.
calcium reserves and stuff. So when you grow them faster on a lower protein, higher carbohydrate food or something that's just sweeter and not as nutrient dense, they'll grow faster to a bigger size. They'll breed at a younger age. Um, but then, like at the end of that first season, you'll see stuff start to crash, or you'll see, poor egg fertility and stuff. So I kept them on. I mean, I formulated my diets to be nutrient dense and not something I wasn't in
Not
a
high
race.
calorie without, yeah.
I wasn't in a race to grow them as fast as they could be grown. Um, and
Gotcha.
and and the formulas that I made, I was able to just raise babies together, and when they got to breeding size, they were able to breed, and they were good, and they didn't have calcium issues and have issues at the end of the season or moving into the following season. So it
Right.
just depends. I mean, especially if you're feeding something on, for example, you can raise a crested gecko on nothing but fruit baby food, and it'll grow to 40 grams or 50
Yeah.
grams. Um, but as soon as you breed it, it's going to just fall apart, you know?
Crash. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So,
that's one thing I tell people that, especially with some of the other species like gargoyles and chihuahua and stuff, it's like they grow so quick sometimes, but it could be deceiving because if you breed it at its first year or whatever, a lot of these females will just start to,
yeah.
contort and look all funky.
Yeah.
Um,
Like Chihuahua, you'll see the tail will get wavy.
Real
Um,
quick, overnight like that.
yeah. Yeah. But usually they'll recover from that. And the
Yeah.
crested geckos will get floppy tail if they still have their tail. And like, I got a question for you because I haven't paid attention that much in the last, say, 5 years. Like in your collection, if you walked into your room right now, what percentage of your adults that are 2 years old have good tails still?
I would say most of them, I would say maybe like 60% out of the ones that have tails,
Hmm.
I would say about like 75 to 80%, with a few just having either a nip or like a slight floppy tail to the side
Right,
or where it or when it indents, and it would go over. But the majority of them are perfect tails.
right. And so you don't have many geckos that are dropping their tails at this point.
No, no, it's funny. I was talking, my brother does most of the feeding and stuff. And after I heard your podcast at Project Herpetoculture, I was like talking to him. I'm like, Alan used to breed to like for them to keep their tails longer. And we're laughing about it because we have some babies that will literally latch onto another's tail and it
Uh-huh.
will not drop it and it will bite half the tail off and
Yeah,
it will
right.
keep the tail. So we're
Yeah.
like, oh, we have you to thank for that. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Well, I think
Um,
that maybe I started that, but the free market also helps with that because
right.
there's a monetary value to if you put two geckos
A
next to
tame
each other
gecko.
and one has a perfect tail and the other one doesn't have a tail, the
Yeah.
the one with the tail is going to be more desirable and someone's going to want to breed it more than the other one. So it
Yeah.
kind of, after a certain point, it was self-regulating, I would say, um,
Yeah.
consciously or subconsciously. But back in the beginning, it was like my biggest concern was like, man, I sure hope we can like get these things to keep their tails.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know. I've talked to Steve. I've talked to a lot of people, and everybody kind of seems to agree that it is a dietary thing. So I've always, I've there's only two diets I recommend, and yours is one of them. Yours being the first one, I always say, just because I think when you put the test of time, yours is the one that withstands the longest, right? And
Sure.
I always tell people there's a lot of new diets that come up, and it's scary because sometimes people, I don't know, they have like a nice little logo or something, or the packaging is nice, and they get swayed by that and they buy that
Right.
diet. And I'm like, and it might be good, I don't know. It might be
You know,
bad, it might
or
be good,
just
I don't
it's
know.
just
But
they're
I've
better.
never
They're better.
tried it, and I can't.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of companies. I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of people that are better at marketing than I am,
yeah,
and marketing sells, and
yeah. Of course.
but it's buyer
Yeah.
beware, sure. Yeah.
Now question, out of your, I always been curious, out of all your Crested Gecko diets, which one is your favorite that you think is like the best, um, most nutritionally sound, or nutritionally variable,
Mhm.
and which one do you think the geckos like best? At least I know you don't keep the New Caledonian stuff as much now, right?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
keep any at all?
I have a few, yeah, but
A few
most of the stuff that I have left is over at Philippe's,
is
but he's down the street, so
right.
I
Oh, that's awesome.
I have him to play with
Um,
whenever I want to. I
what
it's
which of your diets is your favorite?
um I think the I like grubs and fruit a lot.
Okay.
I think the addition of the insects was definitely a big step. But some of my other formulas have like the mango has the black soldier fly larva, as well as plant sources of protein, and as well as um, uh, uh, insect and whey. So it has kind of
Yeah, it
the
has
full
three, right?
full rainbow, I guess
Three.
you would say, of everything. And it also depends on what species we're talking about. One of my favorite formulas for lychees, and I think I'm going to do more formulation with it, is the Fig Frenzy. Um, I'm using chicken stocks, chicken broth,
Yeah.
as a main ingredient in that, and it brings a lot of different stuff to the table. Lechianus are big enough, and there's documents of them actually raiding bird nests and stuff like that. And
Oh,
I also use egg, and I think that's
real,
a
real
great
quick,
as
real
well. Yeah,
quick. Great. I just wanna mention to you because you just said that. So 2 years ago, I have one pair. Well, my main pair of GTs, they didn't produce 2 years ago, and I'm like, man, I wonder what could it be. I talked to Paul Murlock, and he's like, give them more protein. So I got day old quails, and man, I put it right to their face. As soon as I put it, they took it right away without hesitation. And my
yeah,
female took like five, and my male took like three, and he would have probably kept taking if I kept giving him.
yeah.
And then this year, they just produced like four or six eggs. I don't remember, but I was like, that it clicked in my head. I'm like, oh my god, of course they're all the way up there. They've been, a lot of people say they eat birds and stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah,
and after seeing that, I believe it, man.
yeah,
They took right to them.
and the island forms, like I've been out to some of those islands, and like the islands off of Pine Island. And there's not a lot there, but there's a lot of they're like rookeries for birds though, and I think that a significant part of their diet at that time of year could be raiding bird nests for chicks or eggs. But
Yeah,
chicken stock is a great protein. I mean, and it's got its amino acid
nutrients.
profile is unique, and it has its own aroma that the Lechianus I think find attractive, and I think that the other Rhacodactylus seem to like it as much as well. So I want to make another formula that incorporates kind of everything. So we've got my basic my proteins are whey. We use whey protein isolate, and then we use whole dried egg, and then we use an insect meal, and then I also use a blend of pea and rice protein when you combine those at the right ratio. The amino acid profile is very good. I mean, you have a lot of vegan or bodybuilders that like to use plant protein, and that blend of pea and rice protein is pretty favorable even in that community as far as being bioavailable. Now, whether it's when it's bioavailable to a human and bioavailable to a reptile, we have no idea what the correlations are between that. But it's a good healthy blend of proteins. So my next formula will probably be all of the proteins that I have, so including some of the chicken. The problem with the chicken broth is that the stuff just got so expensive. Um, it went from, I don't know, my price on it was like when I started formulating with it, it was like $6 a pound, and now it's like $13 a pound or something.
Wow.
And for me to sell a food that costs less than that a pound, so I have to limit myself. Like generally, I like to split my proteins up. Like if I have four proteins, I'll do equal parts of each of those types of proteins. And so if I have five different proteins, then I'd be doing 20% of each protein, which would be, um, you know, around 4 or 5% of the actual protein in the diet would come from each of those sources. So I can probably get away with it, but I've been hoping that the price comes back down. The problem with the price, that the reason it went up so bad was, I guess it was last year or the year before, was there was a big outbreak of
Yeah.
the bird flu. It
The
was bird
bird flu,
flu
right?
for Newcastle. But yeah, egg and chicken broth is like a commodity, and the price just, like, I had no idea. I bought it.
Yeah.
I when I did some research and decided I want to use it, the price was good, and then all of a sudden it comes through. I make all these labels, make all this food. 6 months later, we need to order some more, and the price is like double, and I'm like,
Uh,
what? Fuck, He's like, oh
yeah.
yeah, it's like a commodity. Every time bird flu comes, the price doubles. You need to stock up.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't just buy 5 years worth of protein, because it has a shelf life. So I buy a 6 month supply so I can keep it fresh. And so when
What
that done, I have to pay the pauper.
I know Fig Frenzy is a seasonal diet that you guys do.
Yeah,
When do you guys? When's the season for that one again?
you know, I don't know. It's kind of like when we started making the seasonal diets. I had 4 seasons, and we would do it at a certain time. But now it's just
Yeah.
like we make we make a couple thousand kilos of a formula, and then when we sell through it, then we make the next one, and it's just kind of going in a
Gotcha.
cycle like that. And
Okay.
so it's not really coming around at the same time of year anymore. It's just we just rotate in order through the different formulas. And so we've got, what have we got? We've got Pineapple Express, we've got Cherry Bomb, we've got Mulberry Madness, and we've got, what's the other one?
The Fig
Cherry.
Frenzy and the pumpkin pie.
Yeah, pumpkin pie is not a gecko diet though.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know it's. But you could feed it to geckos, right?
Yeah,
I
oh
fed
yeah,
it
you
to
could, yeah,
geckos.
and we've got the banana cream pie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I've got one that I'm getting ready to make. You'll appreciate it since you're from Florida, but you might be too young to remember who Vanilla Ice was. But we're
Yeah.
gonna
I
do
know.
it.
I know who you was.
I've got a Vanilla Ice diet queued up, ready to go.
Really? So
And
what's that
yeah,
one gonna? What's the main ingredient in that one?
that's gonna be vanilla.
Oh, vanilla.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. When
Yeah,
should we expect that one?
oh, I don't know.
Where's the
It's
timeline, Alan?
It's
Where's the
been sitting there.
timeline?
It's been sitting there for a while, and we're gonna run a batch of labels here in a couple of weeks. So I'll get the labels done, and we'll probably see it at the beginning of the year.
Okay, can't wait to
Now
see
now I
that.
have no choice, because I
Yeah,
just
yeah. Now you said it.
yeah. But now that we've got this podcast, somebody else will probably come out with it before me.
No way they can, man. No way they can do. You heard it here first.
Yeah. No. I mean, some other brand will come out and put it on the shelves before me. You know how people are with their
Yeah,
knockoff stuff.
yeah.
But
Now question. Now, over the years of you developing this diet, what have you changed over the years, and what like advancement have you seen that made the biggest impact on like the effectiveness of the diet and how the geckos eat it?
um, actually, I would say that the thing that I've changed the most is not actually the ingredients, but it's the grind of the ingredients. Like some before like the pea and the rice protein were pretty granular,
Yeah.
kind of gritty. And now I've got this stuff from it's human grade, and it's actually a few years ago they started using pea and rice protein actually in beverage mixes. So they're doing like protein shakes and stuff
Yeah.
with
So it's finer.
pea and rice protein. So this stuff is like it's like 150 mesh, so it's a really fine suspension. And then the pea protein has gotten better because pea has a kind of a bitter taste to it typically, and so that now they have a new pea protein that we just switched to 6 months ago. That is, I forgot the term that they use for it, but it's they have some kind of a washing process that takes the bitterness out of it, makes it smoother. So I'd say just because nutritionally, like the formula as far as protein, fat, everything else has changed very little
Yeah.
over the years, and so it's really just been um, using my increase in volume to be able to buy higher quality versions of the products that I use. And then like banana is like you would think that dried banana powder is dried banana powder, but I've gone through half a dozen different suppliers that will send me the same spec on paper, and they send me bananas and and they're completely different palatability wise.
Right.
Like
I guess different species of bananas.
no, it's the ripeness of when they harvest them. Like some of the banana powder that I get is freaking green, and it's like, I mean, you eat a green banana and you eat a ripe banana
Yeah.
that's fallen off of and so it's the same
Yeah.
thing with the banana powder. It has the same, it'll have more starch, but on paper, the nutritional analysis on paper of a dried green banana powder and ripe green banana powder is not very different, but you can sure taste the difference.
Oh yeah.
So finding um, finding the ingredient that I wanted was the first part of the process, and then sorting through 20 years of suppliers to get the best version of those ingredients, and then the whole availability of black soldier fly larvae on the market was revolutionary, and that goes all the way back to it's kind of a sidetrack, but I kind of um, was instrumental in black soldier fly larvae becoming a feed in a lot of ways, at least um,
For reptiles.
yeah, for reptiles, and then I was the first company in the world to actually use it in an animal feed when I started using it in my grub pie. Um,
Yeah.
and there was I don't know, 15 years ago, probably, maybe longer, maybe 20 years ago now. I was just on the computer, like, oh, there's got to be more sources of insects for food than superworms and mealworms and
Crickets.
crickets. So I just started Googling like I wanted to find out if there were more insects and if any of them had higher levels of calcium in them. So I was Googling things like high calcium insects, feed, and just all these different things. And I ended up finding this research done by a guy named Craig Shepard, and I think it was the University of Kentucky, maybe. Um, and he was doing a bunch of research um, on pig farms, and their research started out, their goal at the pig farms was simply to reduce the amount of waste that the farms produced. You've got a farm with 10,000 pigs and the shit literally piles high as a building
Yeah.
every day, right? And so
Right.
they set up these processing um, the buildings basically where they brought all the pig manure, and they seeded it with black soldier fly larvae, and they could use the fly larvae to take 2,000 pounds of fresh pig manure and convert it into 150 to 200 pounds of frass that was produced from the larva eating all the manure. So they could
Wow.
literally not have to haul 9 tons of shit away by
Yeah.
by using these insects to process it. And then they found that they could sell the frass as fertilizer to local farmers to put on their fields, and they would come and take it for free or pay to take it away. So they could use this fly. They could use this fly farm to completely eliminate all of their expenses in getting rid of their manure and turn it into actually a positive cash flow. Um, but in the process of doing all that research, he also started analyzing the nutritional value of the fly larva and figured out how to harvest the larva out of this manure. And learning the life cycle of the fly larva was that they would eat for, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, and then when it came time for them to pupate, they would crawl away from the manure and find a place to pupate, like like a superworm turns into a pupa. Well,
Yeah.
the flies would do the same thing, and they didn't want to do that in the fly
And
in
the
the pig shit, or they just get eaten by other they get eaten by other flies. So that he built these little ramps, and they would literally had videos of them just marching up these ramps and just falling off into the jars, and so they would self harvest themselves. Um,
wow.
and so I found through the scientific papers that he did, I found his number and sent him an email. And the guy wrote me back because I wrote him. I said, "Hey, all this stuff you're doing is really cool, but man, have you ever thought about the value of these insects as live feeders
For
for
reptile.
reptiles or for other things, or even the possibility of turning them into meal and making a meal with it?" And so it kind of sparked this conversation over the course of 6 to 12 months, and then he's like, "Well, yeah," and to add to the whole thing, that was kind of like the 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 thing that really made it all work for both of us was that when he was younger, he used to raise mealworms for fishing bait. He raised redworms and mealworms, and so he had raised insects before and kind of knew a little bit about the process. And so he had retired. By the time I had reached him, he had already retired from the project, um, and had time available. And so after our talking, he set up a clean facility. He's like, "Well, I'm not going to send you, and I don't want you to send me, um, black soldier fly larvae that have been raised on pig shit, right? I want something
Right.
clean." So he's like, "Well, I'm going to set up a building in my yard. I have a building in my backyard, an outbuilding, and I'll set it up. I'll raise them on grains, and I'll start sending them to you." And this is when I had thousands of Rhacodactylus at a time, and so he started sending me geckos, and I was just feeding them um, uh,
Actually.
in separate bowls in my Rhacodactylus enclosures. Um, and one of the things that I noticed right away was that if the geckos didn't chew the larva up well, they would pass undigested. Um, and it just, I guess, the chitin mixes up. Their exoskeleton was basically undigestible to some degree. Some had problems, but some didn't. So then I just started grinding them up and putting them in with the gecko diet and feeding it that way. And I was like, man, this really works well. Um,
Wow.
and he's like, well, I'm not set up and I'm not interested in making the meal, but I think that there's a good market um, for selling the larvae, and a lot of other species didn't have the digestion issues that the
Right.
Rhacodactylus did, and I would extrapolate from that maybe basking species like monitors and bearded dragons that are eating and basking under a hot light are able to more aggressively digest their meals
Digest it.
than a gecko that's being kept at an ambient temperature. Um,
Right.
and and so anyway, he went on to start a company called Phoenix Worms and introduced the
Yeah,
first.
I remember that.
So he introduced the first feeder black soldier fly larvae to the hobby. And then that went well for a while. I kind of lost touch with him, and then like God, I don't know. I suck at time schedules, but 5 or 10 years later, I got a call from a guy named John Gramery at either Fort Worth Zoo or Dallas Zoo, and he was working on a project um, uh, for pangolin rescue. There was back at the time a bunch of smuggled pangolin had been confiscated and put into the zoos, and the zoos were having real hard times keeping them alive because they're ant specialists and stuff. And
Yeah.
and John had experience with. They had a good population of armadillos at their zoo, and they were kind of like the closest thing to a pangolin that anybody has had real success with, other than the Xantaresia, the other anteaters. Um, and So he contacted me asking if I could help them formulate a custom diet for the pangolins and for the armadillos. And I was like tickled to death, that a zoo's reaching out to me because I've gotten to a point in my food making career that I've got those kind of people believing
Yeah.
that I can help them. And so I started formulating with him, and he's like, "Okay, I want you to make this, and then I'm going to add this black soldier fly larva meal that we have to what you send me." And I'm like, "Well, where'd you get that?" I'm like, I've been waiting for black soldier fly larva meal for 10 years, and you're telling me that
Wow.
you have some? And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's this guy, Glenn Courtwright, and he set up the first black soldier fly larva production facility, and he's just making meal right now, like by the kilo, and sending it to me." And I'm like, I need this guy's phone number, so I called John up,
Yeah.
and this was a company called EnviroFlight, and he was literally just a startup company in an old feed store in a little town in Ohio. And we hit it off on the phone, and I ended up getting on a plane and going out to his place um, to talk to him about, what I thought the potential was just for me to use the soldier fly larva meal. And then I had some ideas on production because um, defatting the soldier fly larva is an important part and a difficult part of the process of making meal. You can't just grind black soldier fly larva because they're very high in fatty acids. So
Hmm.
you have to like I if you take a soldier fly larva and dry it, I think it's about 30 to 35% fat. And you need to get under 10% fat in order to be able to grind something without it just turning into glue, basically. And so they were trying different ways to defat the meal, and I came up with um, the suggestion of using a seed press because of some other project that I had before. But there's a type of processing for seeds where it uses a giant screw and 3,000 psi of pressure, and it literally squeezes the fat out. Because he was looking in the direction of most commercial facilities use hexane and chemical forms to separate the oil from uh, things like to make fish meal and other things
Yeah.
like that. They use a chemical process because it's fast and easy. But I'm like, man, this black soldier fly larva has the potential to be like one of the greenest products in the market. You don't want to use this chemical process um, to take to defat it, because then you're just turning it into another industrial product and stuff. So anyway, we went back and forth
Right.
became
But
good friends,
how,
and he started
so
making.
so
Good.
no, I was gonna say that's I think that would like sum up what was probably the most important um kind of like the most important thing you found with the diets, because now everybody uses black soldier fly larva, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is
Sorry to
like the
get on
best.
such a tangent there.
No, it's good to it's good to know the backstory to it. But yeah, it's the only insect that you could feed, and you don't have to dust with calcium, correct? Like if you were just to feed
Yes,
the
correct.
insect
Yeah,
itself,
they're
right?
they're by nature on a dry matter basis. Once you press the oil out of them, they're about 1.5 to 2% calcium, depending on how much uh, depending on their diet.
Now, how do you when you're formulating these diets, how do you know what, like, is there anything that you know could be toxic to the geckos that you know not to add, or is that like a, you know, a trial that you do and figure it out that way, or is there certain things that are pretty universal that don't harm anything? How does
Yeah,
that
I
process
mean,
go?
generally you look up an ingredient and you just go down the rabbit hole and look for anything that you think like with plant ingredients, you've got things like oxalates, and you've got you know uh, anything of animal origin is pretty good. It's actually, I mean, plants by nature, they're only plants can't run away from you when you try to eat them.
But
So
they can poison you,
their only defense is to make you not want to eat them by making you sick, or or
right?
or or smell, or producing an odor or something. So it's generally plants that produce compounds that can be toxic at certain levels. Um, and then other than oxalates, there's also hormone like compounds like soy can have estrogen-like ingredients, estrogen-like components to its ingredients, and so you gotta take everything with a grain of salt. It's like, well, spinach is really high in oxalates, but what does that mean? Does that mean I can't feed spinach to them every day forever? Or does it mean I can't give them a pinch? Or like, what's within reason? So generally what I always try to do is I try not to use a lot of anything. Like if I want to have 20%, 25% of my formula to be green plant matter, I'll at least, like, my rule of thumb is to not use more than of that percentage, not to use more than 5% of any single ingredient, so that I have a good balance. Instead of putting
I got you.
25% kale in, I'll put in 5% kale, 5% romaine, 5% carrots. I'll just try to mix everything up so that you're not putting too much of anything in it. But in general, when you're looking at plant ingredients, there's a few off the top of your head that people don't recommend. But man, I see people like on there's some whacked out chick on Facebook that has like 50 groups, 50 reptile groups, and I have like, I don't know what ingredient it is. It's an ingredient that I use. It's a plant ingredient that I have like in a very, very small amount, and she put all this stuff out like, oh, Repashy is toxic because it uses this ingredient and stuff. Everybody stop using Repashy, and it was like, I don't know what it was. It was like blueberries, or something that was just like a tiny
Yeah,
ingredient, completely
it's like I have
ridiculous.
20-year-old geckos that are just raised on
Yeah,
Repashy. What are you talking about?
ridiculous place. No, but this was like not even gecko related. This was like for iguanids,
Oh,
or bearded dragons or chameleons or something. It was one of my veggie diets, and
okay.
and it's like, you know people just,
Yeah,
if they read that a plant is bad, they don't read anything about, like, well, yeah, because they were fed that, nothing else but that for 10 years, and they got sick and died.
right.
It's
Yeah,
like,
and
what
different
is
animals react differently to,
yeah, yeah, it's like,
different
because
ingredients.
anything, most anything within reason can be part of a balanced diet, and a
Right.
balanced diet is a diet that doesn't contain a lot of any one particular
Just one
ingredient.
thing.
So yeah.
Right. That's awesome. Now, when it comes to, I know you have the super pig, and if I'm correct, I think you add a little bit of that to all the regular diets that you have, right? The super pig.
Most of them, I think some of the seasonal blends don't have it.
Okay.
But most of my diets do, for sure. All my OG gecko diets do.
Yeah.
And and those are I mean, carotenoids are one of my ingredients from the very beginning. I was infatuated with all of the the different carotenoid compounds and the different things that they can do. I mean, people look at, oh, they're just there for color. It's like, no, they're
Yeah.
antioxidants. There's a lot of things about carotenoids that we just don't know about. Um,
Right.
and So I include those in small amounts in most of my formulas, because I think they have something to add, and there's nothing to lose by adding them, other than the fact that they add significant expense to my diets because they're very expensive ingredients.
Yeah. And I think back in the day there was people that did studies on fish and birds, if I'm correct, about adding carotenoids to the diet and seeing how it enhanced the color, correct? Or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's not the way you would think. Like carotenoids are like a spectrum, right? You've got your like deep dark burgundy reds, which are from astaxanthin, and then you've got your oranges, which are from like canthaxanthin, and then you've got lutein and zeaxanthin. Zeaxanthin is kind of an orangey yellow, and then lutein is a yellow yellow.
yeah.
Um, but you think like flamingos are the classic example. Like flamingos are pink.
Right.
The pink is astaxanthin. It's such a dark
What they
burgundy,
eat.
but if you thinned it out, you would see that it's actually a pink color. It's the color that makes the salmon meat pink. That's astaxanthin. It's the color that makes
Yeah.
flamingos pink. But the interesting thing is that putting astaxanthin in flamingo diets doesn't make them pink. And in fact, they found out that they can't use dietary astaxanthin uh, to color their feathers. They actually require dietary canthaxanthin, which then they convert to astaxanthin to produce the pink coloration. So it's
Huh.
not all what it seems. It's really really interesting.
Wow. Now, is there that's interesting. Have you found back when you had your massive collection that the super pig or adding those carotenoids to the diets were enhancing the color? Did you do any specific experiments, or you just saw the science previously and then kind of like
Yeah,
went off with that?
honestly, in most reptiles, I didn't see visually much difference, if any, with the carotenoids. Where I really saw it and see it is with amphibians, and I don't know why, but the amphibians and fish seem to really really utilize carotenoids and convert them into um, uh, cutaneous pigment. Um,
Right.
but um, like I had some of the very first red gargoyle geckos, and I raised those groups on versions with Super Pig and without Super Pig. And to be honest, I never saw much of a difference.
Okay. Good to know. Either way, it's still good. Like we were saying earlier, it's
Yeah,
still
it's still a precursor.
nutritionally sound. Yeah.
Still precursor to vitamin A, still had good antioxidants, still good reasons to have it in there, even if it doesn't come out in their color. Birds is another thing. It's weird because yeah, it works in fish, it works in amphibians, it works in birds. I didn't notice it much in reptiles, but it could have an effect, and I just didn't look at it and follow it long enough. Um,
Yeah. Are there any like misconceptions that you still hear in the kind of like in the gecko hobby or industry where people, one of them I think like that I've heard back in the day was like don't feed mealworms or they'll eat through your gecko's stomach, things like that.
yeah, yeah.
Is there anything like that when it comes to the gecko diets that you hear that you want to like set straight?
We touched on it a little bit. I would say um,
Right.
the food that gets eaten the most or that grows the geckos the fast isn't necessarily the best food. It's like
Right.
walking into a classroom and you got a whole bunch of kids and you got scrawny little kids, and you got big overweight kids, and you don't look at the big overweight
Yeah.
kid and say he's the healthiest kid in the classroom because he's the biggest
Right.
kid, right? So
Exactly.
I think you just you need to ensure that you have the proper nutrition to grow the animal at a rate that it can, when it's ready to reproduce, that it's capable of reproducing well,
Yeah.
and feeding them on diets that grow them fast and don't excuse me, but don't meet those requirements is a bit of a ticking time bomb, I would say. Um,
Right.
Otherwise, yeah, I mean, things are so different now. I mean, now there's, I had the only diet on the market for a long time, and now there's 20 diets on the market,
Right.
and most, if not every single diet, is in some way or another a knockoff of what I did originally.
Right.
And you can go through my ingredients list and match the ingredients list, but if your inclusion levels aren't right and your vitamin premix isn't right, it's not going to be the same, So
It's not gonna be
uh,
balanced.
yeah, but I mean, people can do whatever they want. I mean, the animals can do well on a variety of foods. I'm not saying my food is the only food out there that works, um,
Right.
at all. And I'd say variety is key. I think that not getting an animal stuck on one food for years and years, and especially when you've got uh, different ingredients, like we talked about before. It's better to have a variety of ingredients with the same nutritional parameters to mix up, to make sure that that things stay balanced and that you're not overdoing something from a single ingredient. Um, let's see what else. I think that with Rhacodactylus in particular, hydration isn't as big of a deal as it is with most of those species. But I think in general in the hobby that the biggest nutritional and health issue that we have in captivity is dehydration.
Dehydration.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Do you have you do you or have you ever added electrolytes to any of the diets?
Well, by nature, I have electrolytes are part of my electrolytes are just salts of essential minerals,
Minerals.
potassium
Right.
and calcium and magnesium.
Okay.
That's what
Got you.
that's what electrolytes are. And
Got you.
so yeah, everything is balanced and includes electrolytes. Um, when we sweat as humans, we sweat we sweat out the salts, and that's why we need
Right.
electrolyte
So
replenishment.
so you heard it here, guys. If you sweat, you could put that into your gecko's diet, and
Yes,
that way you hydrate your geckos.
just go get a workout and just let it drip
Just
off your
squeeze
chin.
squeeze
Yeah, there you go.
after jujitsu, just squeeze that sweat
That's
into the
right.
gecko diet.
Squeeze it in.
um, Alan, I remember a long time ago, you used to have a uh, God, I forgot what it was called, but I remember the label had like an X-ray of a gecko that was like for a yearly treatment, or it was like
Well, that was
for like worms or whatever.
that was Rescue Cal.
Rescue cow, yeah,
Rescue
yeah.
Cal
Do
was
you?
the one for animals that had basically, calcium crashed. And then
Oh, okay. So it's
you're talking about a product I had. I had Entomibifix, and
yes, yes, yes,
I had
yes.
two products that had one was for amoebic parasites and one was for nematode parasites. One
That
was
had
flat.
like that had the
One was
flagell or whatever mixed
Yeah,
into it
one was
already.
one had fenbendazole, and the other one had metronidazole.
Why don't you do those anymore?
Because I don't want to be considered a
Too?
drug manufacturer by the
Oh, I
FDA.
guess. Oh,
when
okay, okay, okay.
I
So
got I
that would
got
just entail a book of different
when I got a letter
regulations
from
that
the
you.
when I got a letter from the FDA 15 years ago that said you're selling prescription only medications. and we're come after you if you don't stop this immediately. I said, okay.
Okay, no problem, no problem.
That, and I mean that was
Gotcha.
a long time ago. That was when I was still selling stuff in bags, and and the bummer is that shit worked. I mean,
Yeah,
every when I stopped making that stuff, man, people were calling me left and right, and I mean,
yeah.
I had it figured out, like did the weights and measures and had it so you could free feed it, and it was at a good healthy ratio, and it would clear nematodes, it would clear the amoeba, which was I
Wow.
had a I had a I think I was the father of amoeba, it becoming an issue in crested
Uh,
gecko colonies. I don't know, 20 years ago, because at
yeah.
Sandfire we had, that's the only thing that I can think of is that at Sandfire we had big frog rooms, and there was some kind of a transfer from the amphibians
To the
to the
geckos.
geckos with the amoeba. If that's not how it got in my colony, I don't know how it did, but it started wiping out my geckos, and I was just freaking out. I came in one day and there was like 10 dead geckos, and then the next day there was 20 or 30, and then there was
Oh my
50, and
God.
I was like, holy shit. And the first
Yeah.
day it happened, I sent Scott Stahl, and if anybody needs a good reptile vet, I got to give Scott a shout out. He is
Yeah.
the OG herp vet. He's on the East Coast, and if you have animals that you don't know what's wrong with them, if you lose animals unexpectedly, you can send them to him overnight, and he'll do necropsies on them. And so I sent him animals right away, and he called me up like 2 days later when we had time to get him and necropsy him, and he told me he's like, "Hey, you've got amoeba," uh, and 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 he's like, the bad news is it's going to kill all your geckos if you don't fix it, but the good news is we can fix it really easily, and here's what we need to
Okay.
do. Um,
That's
and it,
awesome.
and it was simply fenbendazole, which is Flagyl. Um,
Flagell, right?
uh, and so
Wow.
that's when and then he's like, you're gonna have to dose every animal individually, and I'm like,
No
dude,
way.
I got 5,000 geckos here, dude. That's worse than painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You get to one end and
Yeah.
you start over again, and I'm not going to be able to sleep. And so I worked with him and said, okay, I'm gonna put it in my feed and figure out the math of how much a gecko eats on an average, and be conservative and put it in. And literally in like 2 or 3 days, everything stopped dying, and in a couple of weeks, the colony was back to
Clean.
normal. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that has to be one of the scariest things, just walking
Oh,
into
yeah,
your place and seeing that happen.
yeah. It was
Um,
horrible.
now, now going back to like the breeding aspect of it and everything, was there a particular species out of the New Caledonian geckos that you favored, that you liked the most? Um, Cresteds, gargoyles, lychees. What was
God,
yours?
I was most infatuated with the crested geckos, just because they were all new to me. Um,
Yeah,
but the crested geckos were just special. I mean, visually, the crest and the small group that I started with was so polymorphic. There were so many different characteristics, and I was like, wow, you could breed these for for the structure, the size of the scales. Excuse me, I'm running out of
so
color
the
and pattern,
Cresteds.
and I had a couple of the first ones I had just little signs of like the little scalation where on the
The
dorsal
pinstriping.
scales, and I was like, wow, that'd be cool if I could make that get bigger and go all the way down the side of the gecko, and like 4 generations later, I produced like almost a perfect pinstripe, and I was like, wow, this is just
Yeah.
so awesome.
Is
And
that would that be like your favorite morph, the pinstripe, back when you were doing it?
yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. That was the pins. I had like kind of like back then I grouped them into pinstripes, tigers, harlequins, and then um, reds or what did I call them? I called them coral, I think, at the time,
Yeah.
because it was kind of like the ones I had were kind of that faded. They'd fire up real red, but then
And they
when
go
they
pink.
when they would go pink. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
awesome.
and so I really like the Harlequins and the pinstripes. And in the beginning, those those two traits were kind of hand in hand. The more pinstriping you had, the more Harlequin you had. Um, and um, yeah, just the potential of just you know, I wasn't really thinking about any genetic traits at the time. Just expanding on just the polymorphic traits that were showing up was enough to keep me busy. And then try to make a big square head. You know, I like the big head, the big square heads, um, and uh, uh, and then of course, you know, having a tail was was again like
Yeah.
one of my main goals. Is like I would take anything that had a tail over anything that was super cool that dropped its tail. Yeah, that was
Really?
kind of
Did you have you by any chance kept up with the new morphs that have been coming out and anything? And
a little bit. I mean, I was a pretty big part of the lily white thing
yeah,
because
I was gonna ask you about that too. I didn't know if you wanted to touch on it, but yeah,
yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, Nick Lum, who was Lily
yeah,
Exotics. He was and still is actually my food distributor in the UK. And so, you
yeah,
know, he called me up. He's like, "Hey, I hatched out this really weird looking gecko," and he sent me a picture of him. Like, "Wow, that's pretty cool," you know. And he's like, "Yeah, I hatched out a bunch of them out of nowhere," and so, um, and then he got really bummed because the supers were a bad gene. You know, the supers
yeah,
were
not
lethal,
viable.
were
Yeah.
lethal, and he was ready to shit can the whole project because of the lethal supers.
Wow.
He was like, I'm going to put them all down. I'm going to walk away. I don't even. I just this bothers me a lot, you know. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm like, dude, and then I started giving him examples of like, hey, there's, you know, like I used to keep miniature donkeys, believe it or not, and
yeah,
the same thing with white donkeys. Like you can't breed
yeah.
white donkeys together. White a lot of like box
Dogs. Yeah,
boxers.
yeah,
Yeah, boxers. You end up
yeah.
not just with lethal genes, but you end up with animals that are deaf and you know
Blind and
all
yeah,
kinds of yeah vision and hearing and other problems too. And I'm like, man, it just I mean, if that's the case, there's nothing wrong with a lily white. So just tell people not to breed them together. And
yeah.
and so he kind of let it go and came around and just
So
said,
I know he at the time that Lily Whites came to America, you were already phased out of your massive breeding project or
I had
massive
yeah
breeding facility. So they went to Northern Gecko, correct?
some went to Northern Gecko, some went to Andrew and Sarah
Andrew and Sarah Gilpin.
Gilpin's.
And
Yeah,
how many? Do you remember how many you were brought in?
I brought in originally I think 20. I
20.
think 20. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
think 20.
awesome.
Yeah, and
And does Nick still breed anything? I know he's not doing Lily Exotics, but does he still keep and breed stuff or
he still does. I believe he still does. Just not on the commercial scale that he did, but I believe he still does Crested
right?
Gecko. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I
it's
have some of
funny
my
because the animals that he produced the lily lights out of are animals that I had exported to him a few years before.
wow.
Yeah,
Imagine that. Yeah, no, that's crazy. The Lily White gene, I would say, is probably the most important one right now. It makes the coolest combos. Just like just on its own, it's such a stunning animal.
yeah. I've seen the cappuccinos, and I've seen like I saw a video
Yeah.
you had of some weird looking
The
hypo white
the
thing. What was that?
yeah, so that the super leucistic, that
Hmm.
one was produced by I believe the first people to produce them were Reptiles by Mac,
Okay,
and it's essentially a super lily white, but it's viable
it's
and
viable.
it seems to do great. I haven't had any issues with mine. The only thing that obviously that isn't as attractive on them is that they don't seem to have, for whatever reason, that gene tends to like make them have like basically no crest at all. I'm
Yeah, I saw
wondering
it.
if
It looked almost like a Saracenorum.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if with selective breeding over the years we could get, a crest back on them. But I think they're super interesting as long as they're
Well,
healthy. They haven't shown any problems. And I talked to them over there. They said they were all healthy. But because like the cappuccinos are similar, right? Where they're an
uh,
incomplete dominant, but the super form is also
it's
it's
lethal.
not lethal. It's not lethal. Like they'll live, but some of them, I would say like 90% of them develop issues because they have very, very tiny nostrils. So they don't live the full life, or they start after a year they start to crash really badly
Oh,
and die.
interesting. And the other one, the white ones you're talking about haven't been around long enough to see if they. Uh,
So Reptiles by Mac, from my understanding, has had adults for close to 4 years now,
oh, okay.
and they haven't had any issues. And you could see, like in the animals, their nostril size is normal. They move like a normal gecko. They don't have any.
So are they breeding
No.
those? Are they breeding those to each other and getting viable offspring from those as well?
Yeah, they are. So they're breeding. They've bred leucistic to leucistic, and it produces all leucistics. And then they bred a leucistic to a normal, and then it produces what they call the hypos. And so yeah, it's acting like an incomplete dominant. But very interesting. I think it's just crazy how many morphs just started popping up like left
Yeah.
and right, one after another. We have the sables now too, which are similar to the cappuccinos. So it's really cool. Should get back into breeding.
Yeah.
Hey, have you heard about the Rhacodactylus Williams Henkeli?
Oh, Willie Hinkle. Yeah, yeah.
Willie
I saw
Henkeli?
that. And
You
that was
saw that?
those are the original. Just as far as I know, I haven't talked to Willie or anything, but those are, I believe, just the big like Type A GTs um, that they collected on one of their very first trips.
Yeah,
I don't know that they're really different from like the
type A's.
Poimanes and the Yates. I don't know that they're different. I'm interested to find out though. And then
Yeah,
Mount Kogi's had the big dark morphs. Like my experience in New Caledonia was that you've got the more colorful, smaller animals that are similar to the island forms, and then you've got the big dark morphs, but some of those are light as well. But they were obviously
yeah,
um,
different.
more solid in color and way bigger.
It's funny that years ago we used to call Henkeli, like Lichianus Henkeli, the smaller locales,
Right.
and now and
Now
now
it's
we're calling
really
now it's
Hinkle.
flip flop.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah,
funny because I traveled with Willie a few times
yeah.
and visited him in Europe. We went to New Caledonia. We went to Fiji together, and I always used to introduce him to people as my friend Willie Henkelai. So now, so I my friend Willie Henkelai, and he would just laugh and look at me. And now the gecko is called Willie Henkelai. So that
That's
made me
perfect.
freaking laugh when I heard that.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I saw that they made that post, and I was like, oh crap, I think I have some of those.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah,
Um,
and the giant Hoplodactylus delcorti, that
yeah,
super giant gecko that was from New Zealand,
Sage.
that
Oh,
that
okay.
the one
The
that was
extinct.
the big extinct giant one from New
Yeah,
Zealand, they figured out was actually not from New Zealand, and it was from New Caledonia. Um, and so I don't know how different that is to the big Leachianus uh, either. I mean,
the
it looks like a bigger version of a GT
Alici. Yeah.
or you know or just a really big one. One of my trips, I went to a place that was like the oldest remaining um, rainforest in New Caledonia, where it still had the big giant trees and stuff. And and I found some eggs. This was back in the day of my forums, and I posted pictures of the eggs. And these eggs were like twice the size of any GT lychee egg I'd ever seen. And we found like
Oh,
3 or 4 eggs at the bottom of this one of the biggest trees in New Caledonia. I mean, it was like the base of it was like a giant redwood. I mean, it was like
Yeah,
a giant tree,
that's
huge
insane.
tree. And
There,
and I always,
there's probably species out there that aren't discovered yet. And
yeah,
did you actually hear about that species that they found near the like near rivers or bodies of water that jumped into the water and swim away?
I
Did you hear
did.
about that?
Was it a skink or was it
No,
a
no, it's a
was it
gecko.
a gecko? That's
And
right.
and it's a big gecko too. It's like rivaling lychees, I guess. Not as
Crazy,
heavy bodied,
yeah,
but a big gecko.
crazy that something like that could all of the time that Bauer and all of his students spent um, researching and scouring those islands that something like that could be missed. It's amazing, and it makes you for sure know that
Yeah.
there's still stuff out there. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think it was Bauer and his group of students that were the ones who, or they heard about it from somebody and then they went back and then they found
Okay.
one.
Yeah,
So
because
it's
Bauer did most of his work there in, I would say, the early 2000s.
yeah,
So, and I don't know how long they kept there, but like his book on New Caledonian geckos, and like he described like all of a sudden after all their research they described like 30 new species of bovia and just like a whole
yeah,
bunch of stuff, and that was all. So I remember I invited him and he came to my New Caledonian Gecko Symposium. For like a
yeah,
lot of the hobbyists, they probably never heard of that. But in 2006,
yeah. I remember.
I organized a gecko symposium that was like 2 days before Tinley Park,
Yeah,
and it was like the who's who of New Caledonian hobbyists and scientists. It was kind of like the first time that the scientists and the hobbyists kind of came together because I had Willie Hinkle and um, Robbie Sipe um,
yeah.
were there. Aaron Bauer was there. Alan Meyer was there. Um, Philippe was there. I was there. Uh, it was kind of the who's who at the time of New Caledonian geckos, and
Still,
and he talked about his research that they were doing, and I think his book had just been published around that time. And then we had an auction, and the winner of the auction got to be like he auctioned off the naming of a species.
oh my God,
It
how
was really
awesome is
cool.
that?
How cool was that? Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what? You know what sucks? That I remember you guys putting that on, but at the time I was just so young, I couldn't afford going or
You were
anything.
probably like
But
eight.
I was a little bit older, but but I do remember it, and I was like so bummed out I couldn't go. And I think
Yeah.
didn't you guys have another one in Daytona one year, or am I wrong?
Not
Or maybe
not
it wasn't you.
not for Rhacodactylus. I think that there was something that happened. I don't know if it was at Daytona or before Chicago again in recent times. But back then there was
Yeah,
the IGS, International Gecko Society, I think it was called,
yeah,
had talks um, at Orlando and then at Daytona for quite a while, but then that kind of fell apart. But yeah, it'd be nice to redo those talks and have all those people again because there's
yeah.
so.
When you guys doing Herpeton again?
Oh, I had an idea for that. We were supposed to talk about it on the podcast with Roy and Phil, and I had actually kind of set a date and realized that the date I wanted to do it was the same date as the there was some reptile talks last
Yeah,
year um,
yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
that Rami and um, Jay Summers
Summers,
and
Jay
a
Summers.
couple of people put together, and so they're doing it again this year. And we built this property out in the desert in Ocotillo, um, and I put up a couple of steel buildings. One is like a shop for my off-road cars and toys and stuff. The other one is it's like a 2,500-foot steel building. Then we framed out a house inside of it, so it's actually like a nice place to stay and stuff. And the shop is 3,000 square feet, like
Mm.
big enough to do talks in and stuff. And so I thought of doing like kind of like a Burning Man version of Herpaton, where we do it in the desert, and
Yeah.
talk about reptiles around a campfire in the middle of the desert.
Oh
And then
man, dude,
and
bring
then
it
and
back.
then
Let's
go
do it.
and then take a 3 hour break and go road hunting and come back and talk some more, you know.
Let's do
Um,
it, Alan. I'm
and
for it.
so
We're promoting here.
I want to do that, and I set a date, and it was the same freaking date that they're doing those reptile talks because um,
Yeah.
in Ocotillo it's cold in the winter and it gets hot really fast, so you've got this small window of like perfect herping weather. So S2 is like a famous road where everybody
Yeah.
herps in the desert in Southern California, and my
Yeah.
property is um, a quarter mile off of S2. So it's right
Oh
there in
man.
the middle of like it's my property is in Sidewinder City. Like you can't go a quarter mile down the road without finding a Sidewinder. And then
Wow.
there's desert iguanas all over my property. But anyway, I really wanted to do that, and I set the date, and then it turns out it was the same day as their thing, and the opportunity um, for uh, doing it, I have probably like to hit it where I know it's not going to be too hot or too cold. I've got about a month to do it in, and
Small window.
that's kind of like the end of April, the beginning of May, you know. And so right, you like traditionally, what is that? Memorial Day or Labor Day that starts the summer? Is it Memorial Day? I think it's Memorial Day.
Memorial Day. Yeah, probably.
I
I
think
don't
it's
know.
Memorial Day.
I get
So
those mixed up all
yeah,
the time.
yeah. So Memorial Day or the weekend before is like always been the traditionally the a really good time to go to the desert. So now I've got to figure out if I just do it at the same time anyway, or the week before, the week after. It's like a bummer because like, it's like, oh, we'll go do the reptile talks this weekend, and the next weekend we'll do desert. But how many people can afford to leave for a week?
Yeah.
People have jobs
Yeah.
and lives and stuff, and then you can't, come from Florida for a week for the talks, go home, and then fly back
And
again
then
for the
come
next
back.
week.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
got to figure it out. But that's kind of the plan. Philippe and I talked about just doing an informal thing with like, invite certain people that have certain knowledge, but not really schedule like certain talks at certain times. Just kind of like
Yeah.
spend a weekend together and hang out at the campfire, do a little herping, do a little off-roading, go on some hikes, and just make it as much of a social event as it is, organized talks and stuff. So you come out for that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Oh, 100%. I'm a grown man now. I got grown man money. I can go.
Yeah, but you got a baby at home
I,
though.
I do. I do. I know. But I can sneak out for a weekend.
You got you
I
got you
can
got
sneak out for
you
a
got to get
weekend.
you got to get a hall pass now. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
Gotta get a hall
Yeah.
pass.
Is that what your favorite thing about the hobby, Alan? When great minds come together and new people that are excited about it come together and just kind of like that spark is there and people
Yeah,
get
you know what?
excited about
For
it.
me, from day one, the hobby was more. It was about more than just the animals, and it should be.
Yeah.
For me,
Yep.
it was as much about the relationships and meeting the people, and developing the relationships and knowledge. Like it's so different now. Like when I was trying to do what you're doing. How old are you?
I'm 31.
31. So yeah, so that's 30 years ago for me. So that was pre-internet basically. And so for me, it was
Right.
like, back then it was like in order to learn about a species, you had to find the person that was working with them, if there was that person, and you had to write them a letter or get their phone number and get their attention, and everything everything that you wanted to learn, you had to get out of somebody's head.
Yeah.
Now you can just go Google it and read about it, but then it was
Yeah.
about it's again it's like an adventure. It's about the journey, not just the destination. It's not just about having a success breeding something. It's about learning the process, and that learning process and getting that knowledge from somebody. It's like, you know, somebody decides that they have knowledge that you're worthy of having. It makes you feel honored that they're passing that on to you, you know,
Yeah.
and you develop, you know, good friendships and personal relationships with people where I don't think you see that as much now anymore. I mean, so many people, um, their relationships are just over a computer and through texts and emails um, and doing
Or
research on.
not. Yeah. Not sometimes, not even. Sometimes it's a one-way relationship where that you know the person and they don't know you back.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think there's a give and take. I think there's so much that's amazing and awesome and wonderful about the internet and about getting to, like, for example, this right now. I could talk to you, and then we could broadcast this, and a lot of people get to gain all this new information. But we do lose a little bit of that, like, personal, like, relationship building
Yeah, for
that we
sure.
would get
And
otherwise.
another thing too about like back in the day, but say that you were an expert in some you know species that I didn't know anything about, and you took the time to teach me about it, and I learned some knowledge from you, and maybe I had something that you were interested in. But then it's like, oh well, what else are you interested in? And so you follow this path of not necessarily um, the pretty pictures that you find on the internet of stuff that you want to keep. The path was more like, what else are you keeping, or who do you know, and what do they keep? And you're following this path where you don't even really know what the species are. You just know that you
Yeah.
know somebody who knows how to take care of a certain species, and then you try to figure out, is that a species for me? Like you follow the knowledge path that leads you to the species instead of having the species and looking for the knowledge. So it was very different. Like the value of knowledge was so different now because
Yeah.
now you can just go find the knowledge. Before you had to find
Yeah.
the people. You had to find the people to find the knowledge, and those
Yeah.
people had to want to talk to you, right? I mean, if you were a
Yeah.
dick, you weren't going to learn what they knew. You know,
Yeah,
so
just by nature, whatever you have to put more effort to, you're gonna value more.
yeah, yeah,
And nowadays, you a simple Google search will tell you everything you need to know about
right,
something.
right. Yeah, and then you can also have crossover interests that are outside of the hobby, and you meet people that are
Right.
also like, I mean, like you and I shared martial arts. I don't know if you do jujitsu, but you do kickboxing,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. I'm a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, but
oh,
yeah,
okay, right on.
I was an instructor in kickboxing, Muay Thai, and that's
Very
my
cool.
main passion.
Yeah, so my daughter is 12 now, and she's
Yeah.
doing both. She's doing Muay Thai twice a week and Jiu-Jitsu
Yeah.
twice a week, and she's teaching the kids that are younger than her in Jiu-Jitsu.
That's
And
awesome.
I have her. She's taking a private every week in kickboxing from her coach is a renowned kickboxer, and she competes in MMA as well. So she's got
She competes?
no, not my daughter, but her instructor.
Oh, oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay. I was about to say
Yeah.
that's gonna pull on your heartstrings, man. That I
Oh, I
remember.
know.
I'd be more scared having my friends compete than me competing myself. Like, it's
I
just
know.
like,
Yeah, it's like I can take a punch in the face, but to see my daughter get punched in the face,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Oh
don't
my
know.
God. Yeah.
I don't
That's
know.
something
Yeah.
my wife and I talk about all the time now that we have our son. Is like, I mean, naturally she knows, like, I'm gonna
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna teach him stuff, and I'm gonna take him
Yeah.
to the gym, and I want him to, you know, be part of that lifestyle. But at the same time, I'm always like, I don't want him to be a fighter. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want him to start to like it too much that he wants to
Right.
become a fighter, because that's a brutal life.
Yeah. I
But
told my daughter, it's like, I'm old for a father. I'm first time father at 50, and so I feel like
yeah.
I have half the time of everybody else to be a parent, right? I've got half the time to teach my kid everything before I'm no longer here. And I look around at the world that she's growing up in, and it just honestly scares the shit out of me.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, man.
the way this world is changing around us, and I'm
Yeah.
like, man, if there's anything I need you to do, I need to have the confidence in myself. I need to have the confidence that you can take care of yourself, And so I said,
Yes.
you know, you can choose a lot of different things, but you don't get to choose whether or not you do jujitsu. I said you're gonna
That's
learn
good.
jujitsu. I said
There,
you can take the Muay. You can take. I can let you like. You can do the Muay Thai or you can not do the Muay Thai. That's up to you. But you're gonna do jujitsu.
jujitsu.
Yeah.
There's so many. Yeah, it's funny because there's just so many life lessons, and I always say this, that Muay Thai and like competing and going through that circuit has taught me so much more about just like the techniques and the martial art, about myself and about just
Oh,
like life in general.
it's about respect
Yeah,
and 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 just like our gym is much. You know, she has more. If you asked her where her best friends are and where her family is outside of our house, it would be the
it's at
gym,
the
not
gym.
school.
Yeah,
It wouldn't be anywhere but the gym. I mean, those are her family and stuff, and the fact that she learns um, how to deal with pressure and anxiety. I mean, you take a kid and you take a 12-year-old kid and you throw a 15-year-old kid on top of him that's trying to hold him down and choke him, and then the kid off the street's going to pee in their pants. I mean, that's a traumatic experience.
yeah,
But to have a
yeah.
12-year-old that she's like, oh, daddy, do I have to wrestle with this 16-year-old dude that weighs 180 pounds? I'm like, yeah, go for it. He's a good kid. I always, you know,
Right.
I teach, and I'm walking around with my black belt on, so I get respect from all the young kids when they're when I'm there and an older young man is rolling with my daughter, he knows I'm standing there watching him,
Right. Right.
so I'm like, hey, don't worry about it. I'm here, and he's going to respect me, and he'll take care of you. I'm like, you know, if anybody gets too aggressive, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. And so she, you know, to be a 12-year-old girl that's, used to being in stressful situations like that physically, it makes mental stressful things like being bullied at school just roll right off the back of her
That's
shoulder.
exactly it. That's exactly it.
Nothing bothers her. There's nothing that's going to be more stressful than another kid that's older and bigger than her trying to take her arm off. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
she can laugh at everything else. And her friends at school, like she's very protective of her friends at school. She's, I tell her she's ever gets accused of being a bully, that life is going to be very difficult for her from then on. But if she
Yeah.
but if she gets in trouble at school for defending herself or defending another kid, I'm right there to back her up. And like
Oh, yeah.
when she was in like fifth grade, she got in a altercation, helping another kid that was getting bullied, and the teacher calls me and he's like, oh, your daughter is misbehaving. She's doing this, and I'm like, well, she was
She
protecting
put the
me.
kid in the arm bar.
Yeah, I'm like, well, is this what happened, or did something else happen? He's like, no, that's what happened. And I'm like, okay, well, I said, then I'm not going to tell her not to do that. She was doing the right thing,
Right.
and she was protecting another
Yeah.
kid. And then she's like, well, she's going to get suspended if she does that again. I'm like, if she does that again, and it's for the same reason, I'm going to take that day that you kick her out of school, and I'm going to take her to fucking Disneyland.
Yeah.
The teacher's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I back
I
her 100.
remember.
It's like, yeah.
That's awesome, Alan. I think that's exactly the way I think. That's exactly the way I'm gonna raise my kid. And I remember a couple years back. I don't know if you remember. You had this awesome birthday party for your little girl. What was it, like her sixth birthday party or something? That you had them dig up dinosaur
Oh, the
bones.
dinosaur party. Yeah, I think that was
Yeah,
6 years old. Yeah. Oh, that was fun.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
right, because you helped me edit
The
the
video.
video. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Awesome. I appreciate that.
I always remember that, and I'm like, dang, that's got to be like one of the coolest things anybody's ever done for their kid at a birthday party.
Yeah,
I've literally never seen that.
my neighbors all hated me after that. They're like, "Thank you. How are we
They have
gonna
a high
top this
bar.
for our kid?" So for
Yeah,
those of you listening, what I did was I went to Home Depot and they had these T-Rexes and some other. The T-Rex was literally like
for like
8 or 9
Halloween or
feet
something.
tall. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Halloween because their birthday's in October. So they had these giant T-Rexes and a bunch of other dinosaurs that were all big, right? And so I have a property and I have an excavator, a big tractor. So I got like two T-Rexes and a Velociraptor and some saber-toothed tigers and all this stuff. And I dug this big trench in my grove and buried all this stuff, put like a big mound over them, and then dug
That's
a
so
trench and
cool.
then set it up kind of like an excavation site where I put this mound and then I dug a trench next to the mound and put like boards in the bottom of it and a railing like it was a set up excavation site, and stuff. And we had this birthday party. There was like, I don't know, 25 kids or something. And, the kids all got spatulas and toothbrushes and like tools and they started digging and finding the stuff and just it was just the
That's
funnest
so
thing to
cool.
watch these kids go discover all this.
That's a high bar to set
It
for
was
their
very cool.
neighbors.
It'll be one of the memories I keep in heart for the rest of my life for sure.
For sure.
Yeah,
Your daughter's name is Cheryl, right?
Carol, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. All right, man. I think that's a good note to end it on. Alan, thank you so much. Um,
Thank
I
you.
think I think when people listen to this and just like the amount of knowledge that you have is really important, and I think a lot of people um, they kind of like graze over things and they kind of just trust some outside
Trust the
forces
marketing. Trust the
or
marketing.
marketing or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's good to do your research and especially when we're talking about animals and everything. So I appreciate all the amount of knowledge and effort and work that you've put into your career, and it's definitely shown. Our market, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without you. So I appreciate you so much, man. Thank you so much for being here with me. And is there anything else that you want to let people know before we log off?
God, I'd like to just thank everybody out there that keeps Rackadactylus because it's like, it's so cool to like have had this vision, almost 30 years ago to have had this vision of what Rackadactylus could become and how they could develop and become a huge part of the hobby and to have that happen and now have all people like you and all these other breeders out there now that are just carrying the torch and coming up with just like I mean I literally like watched some of your videos last week and went down a rabbit hole of kind of like what's happening with crested geckos out there right now like Anthony and Jess, what's Anthony's name? Velasquez?
Vasquez.
Vasquez, yeah.
Vasquez, yeah.
Some of the stuff he's doing and the way he's been laying out all of the genetics and stuff. It's like, man, it's so cool just to see all this happen from where it started and
Did you ever think that your vision would branch off into so many different
not really because when I had my vision, I don't even think there was an albino leopard gecko yet. I mean,
uh
like leopard geckos. I think when I had the first crested geckos, I think leopard geckos was like Ron Tremper was producing jungle leopard geckos that had like a squiggly pattern on them, and that was like you
the
know
coolest thing
as
ever.
much as they've done with leopard geckos. I'm sure I could be wrong, but I mean, there was no example like what you know, seeing the example that leopard geckos had come to say, wow, I wonder if crested geckos can become this. It was like, I wonder what they can become because there's not really anything that's come before it that there is to follow. I mean, you can look at the snake market and see all of the
Yeah, the
collision morphs,
morphs.
stuff like that. But it was really just like God, I hope this um, becomes something, and that it becomes as near and dear to a bunch of people in the future as it is to me. It was to me back then, and so yeah, thank you to everybody that's taken an interest in them and made them still interesting and exciting. It's like after looking at all these videos, it's like fuck, I want to start over again. I want to get some
if
more and
if you ever do, I'll send you some. So just let
yeah,
me know.
like some of the gargoyles that you have are insane. Like the gargoyles were much slower than crested geckos. And
Yeah, yeah. They're
on
catching
average,
up.
on
I'm
average,
working hard.
But on average, in order to see progress in a gargoyle gecko, it takes twice as many years as with a crested gecko because
Mm,
they grow slower, they reproduce a little slower, and they don't
yeah.
produce much, so it's a little bit slower. And so, my vision of what a red gargoyle gecko could be, I never got to see until I saw some of your animals, and it's like, yeah, wow, that's awesome. And then like lily whites, it's really cool when it's a certain part of the gecko, but then all of a sudden when the whole gecko becomes a lily white, it
It's like
becomes
you
not
want
as
to,
cool anymore. It's like,
yeah, you want to go backwards a little
yeah,
bit.
you have to have the contrast, right? If it's
Yeah.
all white, then it's all white. It's not as cool as an all white gecko with a dark bar on the side or with some harlequin, or at least to me, I mean
Yeah.
everybody's.
No, I agree. I agree 100%.
And what's
We
so
we kind
cool
of
about,
we kind of bred for that, and then we reached it, and we're like, oh wait, and then we
yeah,
just like kind of backtrack.
we need to back up, or we need to put these genes into something else now. Yeah,
Yeah.
clean them up and then inject them into other things. And so yeah, it's just, and then just focusing on everybody. Like I'm sure probably still, like back when I was kind of like 10 years into it, you could look at like the top 10 breeders who each kind of had their own idea of what they liked about crested geckos. And you could like look at a random gecko and say, oh, this is one of so and so's, because you could see the characteristics that he's been trying to develop, whether it's a crest or a certain color. And it's almost like you could just look at the animals and know whose lines they were. But now there's so many different lines of
It's
so many
yeah.
different people. I don't know if you can still do that anymore.
A
Uh,
little bit. I could do it somewhat, but yeah, then there's so many people out there that it starts to get tough. But I know exactly what you're talking
yeah,
about, and it's funny because you develop an eye for it, where
yeah,
certain breeders have a look,
that'd be a
and
fun that'd be a fun contest to have. Would be to have like a
who can
picture of
recognize.
10 geckos and say name that breeder.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
See if you can figure out whose line it was from. Yeah, that'd be good. But yeah, gosh, I guess
Well,
probably about it. How long we been talking? What time is it?
hour and 45 minutes.
All right, cool.
All right, my brother. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Alan.
Yeah.
Again, I'll shoot you over the link when it's up. Okay.
Okay, sounds good, man.
All righty. I'm gonna end
Thanks
the
a lot.
recording.